members on early morning on that too on Sunday. But as usual, sir, JB Nagar always having the sessions at the weekend, either on Saturday evening or the Sunday morning. But today we're having the very important topic, and to cover up this important topic, we also having the very important person. But before we take his formal introduction and all, let us start with our institute motto song as a mark of our respect. So I would like to share my screen and I request all the members to please be in alert mode while we play our institute motto.
य एष सुप्तेषु जागृति य एष सुप्तेषु जागृति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्विमाणः निर्विमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शितः सर्वे तदूनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्द्वैता 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 एतद्द्वैता.
Thank you, members. So now regarding today's topic, today we're having the subject Code of Ethics Do's and Don'ts. And on this very important topic, we have with us our respected past president, CA Manoj Fadnis sir. And with the Manoj sir, we also had a plan to have the CA Kemisha madam, our Central Council member. But because of her health issue, she will try to join, but otherwise today the Manoj sir will have to play the dual role. She'll have to take these sessions, which was either way it was supposed to be covered by Kemisha madam, and now the Manoj sir will have to take that role. So thank you very much, Manoj sir, for taking these efforts and helping our members to have enlighten us on a very important topic, Code of Ethics. See, Code of Ethics, actually, it's a collective concern of the institute as well as the member. But to having the ethical behavior in the individual member in his personal capacity, it should be more, rather it should be self-evident. So with these words, now I would like to invite our regional council member, Pinky Kedia madam, if she can just welcome our past president, CM Manoj Fadnis sir, and then I would request our coordinator, today's coordinator, CM Rahul Bhai Daga, to formally introduce the Manoj sir, and then Manoj sir will continue his session. Pinky madam, please.
Thank you, Jayesh bhai, to give me this opportunity to call me and to invite me, Manoj ji. Manoj ji is very well conversed with the Code of Ethics, and we are fortunate that we are able to hear his experience and knowledge about Code of Ethics in our study circle. So Manoj ji, welcome to our JB Nagar study circle, and we are here to hear you only. And if Kemisha ma'am can come, it will be great. But because of health problem, I think she will not be able to join. But I'm sure Manoj ji will take care of all the topics, because both were earlier jointly used to give the session. So welcome Manoj ji again, and I don't want to waste more time of the participant. And thank you.
Rahul bhai, now actually the formal introduction is not required, but sir, as Manoj sir said, only if you can just finish it up in just 1 or 2 minutes. So Rahul bhai, just you can just formally introduce our today's speaker, and so that then sir can take it forward.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Today's speaker, CM Manoj Fadnis sir, as such requires no introduction. He was a past chairman of the ICI in the year 2015-16 and vice president in 14-15. He is the immediate president of the Confederation of Asian and Pacific Accountants as a regional international organization of 32 professional institutes from 23 countries from the Asia Pacific region. He is also served on the boards of State Bank of India and is currently an independent director on the board of Federal Bank of India. He has been chairman of all the standing committees and disciplinary committees while acting as the president of the ICAI. Currently, he was also the non-executive chairman of the MP Stock Exchange for the year 2012, 2000 till 2014. He's presented more than 1,000 technical papers in seminars and conferences within India and internationally. With this short, brief introduction, I would like everyone to please welcome our today's speaker, CM Manoj Fadnis sir, with a round of applause. Over to you, sir.
So, sir, before you start, we request all the member, whatever queries if you have, you can just mention your queries in the chat box. And at the end, we'll keep our 10-15 minutes for the Q&A sessions, whatever the time permits. So we request all the members to post your queries in the chat box. Now, sir, the is yours, please.
Thank you very much, CA Jayesh Bhai, for inviting me to this webinar. I'm extremely delighted and honored to be present in this webinar of JB Nagar CPE Study Circle, a very prominent CPE study circle. I had the good fortune of attending this a physical meeting, so to say, many years ago, and I found it to be full of vibrant members with a lot of activities being conducted. At the same time, very interesting subjects always being taken up for the benefit of members. Incidentally, I had an occasion to address last year on a topic through a webinar, which is now the most popular mode of communication these days. So thank you very much, Jayesh Bhai, for again inviting me today. And good to have meet CA Vijeta, CA Purvi, CA Rahul Bhai, and all others. And I must also recall my good friend, CA Sanjeev Maheshwari ji, past council member, with whom I had the good fortune of working in the institute for 9 years as council members and many more years together in the institute. So JB Nagar is, yes, one study circle which is always in my heart, as my daughter, who is also a member of an institute, happens to be a member of this study circle. She stays in Andheri East. So I'm very happy to join any meetings of JB Nagar CPE Study Circle. Today, actually, the keynote speaker was CA Kemisha Soni, who has served on the Ethical Standards Board in different capacities for last 6 years. And now this is the 7th year she's in the council. In all those 7 years, she has been actively working in the Ethical Standards Board. So we would have had no better person than Kemisha when explaining the new changes, what has happened, why it has happened, what are the recent council decisions, and the thought process which is there in the Ethical Standards Board and also in the council. Unfortunately, she is not well today, and therefore I'm a substitute batsman for her. I'll try and do my best in terms of presenting what I can on this subject. Code of ethics is a very interesting subject. Essentially, we should keep code of ethics much higher than even the legal principles, in the sense that at times certain things may be legally permissible, but the question is whether it is ethically correct to do that. So if we test on ethics and if we test a issue on legalities, so we may find that legally it may be permissible, but if you test it on ethical principles, it may not pass that test. So code of ethics is more on principle based, giving matters or laying down broad principles. Of course, we have Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 of the Chartered Accountants Act, which defines what is a professional misconduct. So that is clear things which are not to be done. But besides that, there are so many matters which are contained in, let's say, now what is covered as Volume 1. volume 1 is where we are benchmarked with the International Code of Ethics. So it is more principle based. There are a lot of guidelines available to us to ensure that we comply with these ethical standards in the right perspective and carry out our professional duties. So I'll start with this presentation, which was essentially to be done by Kemisha ji. But the thoughts which she had, maybe I'll try and explain that as we move along in this presentation. So just giving an overview, there are 3 volumes in which the Code of Ethics is now being captured. First volume is what is conversed with the ISBA, the International Ethical Standards Board. So ISBA is promoted by the International Federation of Accountants, and our institute is a founding member of International Federation of Accountants. So in that sense, we are one of the founding members also of ISBA. The International Code of Ethics, we first adopted in 2008, and thereafter there has been a static position. In 2018, ISBA came up with a new Code of Ethics. Our institute was quick to catch up with the revised Code of Ethics, and in 2019, the institute adopted the latest Code of Ethics of the International Ethical Standards Board. So 2018, it was issued worldwide. 2019, we completed the adoption process to be made effective from 1st of April 2020. Given the pandemic situations which existed in 2020-21, so instead of 1st of April 20, it became effective from 1st of July 2020. Some of the principles are not yet made applicable, and we'll discuss them as we go ahead. So volume 1 is what is the internationally accepted Code of Ethics. I may just mention that for an Indian chartered accountant, a member of our institute, complying with the international ethical principles is relatively easier, in the sense that what we have grown up with since 1949 as an institute, our Code of Ethics has been more robust and more principle based, of course. At the same time, it has been far ahead of what was actually being followed in the Western economies. So just to give you an example, for instance, since beginning, we know that statutory auditor and internal auditor, these are required to be different functions. But in some of the economies, it was possible for them to carry out both the functions, provided they had a Chinese wall between the audit, between the two respective audit teams. So in that sense, what was being permitted in the Western world for a long time, and it was only in 2002 when the Sarbanes-Oxley Act came in the US, that this practice got discouraged and finally impermissible. So many of our principles have been more robust, and we have been following them for a longer period of time. And therefore, I believe that for an Indian chartered accountant, following the International Code of Ethics is not difficult. Having said that, some of the principles are different, and therefore we need to ensure what are those different principles and how they need to be integrated in our Code of Ethics. So that is volume 1. Volume 2 is containing our Chartered Accountants Act, CA Regulations 1988, the first schedule and second schedule to the CA Act. So all that, what the council has prescribed over a period of time, is there in volume 2. And volume 3 is the disciplinary cases. So what the council has done is that whatever are the guiding principles which can be found from the established decisions in the disciplinary matter have been compiled and have been put in as part of volume 3. So volume 3 is a compilation of all the disciplinary cases. But when we refer to volume 3, we need to bear in mind a fact that the disciplinary cases are not like tax cases. Like, for instance, there is an addition made and we cite so-and-so tribunal, so-and-so high court in favor of the SSE. And therefore, we align our facts and say this is the question of law decided by the high court and it should be applied in my case. In a professional ethics cases, two facts of two cases will rarely be the same. And it is a question of a conduct. And therefore, the way we apply tax cases in our tax proceedings, we cannot really depend on these cases in the same manner and to the same degree. So with that caveat, we should look at this volume 3. It is a guiding principles, what the council has decided in different cases. In some matters, we may find that council may have held a person not guilty, or the present disciplinary mechanism may have held a person not guilty under certain facts and circumstances. Does not mean the same should be in a similar situation in another case. One can say that I am also not guilty because that person was not held guilty. So with great care, we should understand what is the subject matter of disciplinary cases and then apply in context of the factual circumstances of another case. So this is what is the overall coverage of Code of Ethics in terms of volume 1, volume 2, and volume 3. Now, as I said, volume 1 has been made applicable from 1st of July 2020, but for these 3 services which have been deferred. And they have been deferred for a very rightful reason. They were deferred from 1st of July to 1st of July 2021, and then they were deferred up to 1st of April 2022. And in March 22, the council has again decided to defer them by a period of 6 months. So as we stand today on 29th of May 22, these 3 aspects covered in Code of Ethics are not applicable, are not made effective as of today. Now, friends, as and when the council decides that the situation is ripe for their implementation, the council will make that announcement. But it is important for us to understand what are these issues and how we need to prepare to ensure compliance with these matters. As our convener mentioned that we do have certain time period at the end of the session for Q&A, but just in case, if you have any questions as we discuss, and if you want to raise it, and if the convener permits it, we can maybe take up questions as we move forward. The 3 aspects which have been deferred: responding to non-compliance of laws and regulations, or NOCLAR as it is called. Now, what is NOCLAR? We have Standard on Auditing 250, which requires compliance with laws and regulations when we're issuing the audit opinions. I think NOCLAR starts where SA 250 ends. And the reporting responsibilities have been further enhanced in terms of the requirements under NOCLAR. So SA 250 gives an option that if there is non-compliance with laws and regulations, you have brought it to the notice of the management, you have reported it to those charged with governance. And even then, if you are not satisfied with the compliance with laws and regulations, the auditor has an option to resign. However, in the recent past, as we know, the SEBI as a regulator has mandated that if you resign in a particular period of a quarter, you need to complete the audit for that quarter. You cannot resign in the 3rd and the 4th quarter. And if you do so, you are still required to continue in your office and issue the audit opinion. So direction by SEBI in that sense overrides the Code of Ethics and does not permit an auditor to resign. But NOCLAR requires the non-compliance to be reported to the regulators. If those charged with governance have also not complied with those non-compliances, have not ensured to breach that non-compliance, then it becomes the responsibility of the auditor to report it to the concerned regulator. Now, that is where the procedures which are required to be established, not just between our fraternity, but also with the industries, need to be set out clearly. There also needs to be a guidance from the institute on this area, and I'm told that the Ethical Standards Board is working on it. But assuming for a moment that the council decides to implement this NOCLAR, and we do not have a guidance from the institute specifically addressing this issue, I would suggest members to look at the guidance note already issued by the council with respect to our reporting duties under section 143.12 of the Companies Act. Under 143.12, auditor, as you know, is required to report to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, Secretary, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, Government of India. And there's a process which has been laid out in case he finds a fraud or a fraud is being committed or a fraud has been committed, which comes to the notice of the statutory auditor. The auditor is required to bring it to the notice of the audit committee, give a time period of 45 days, and after that period of 45 days, report it to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. So there's a guidance note which has been issued way back in 2015. That guidance note also contains a very wonderful flow chart. So what are the steps which an auditor should take to guard oneself that it is not a frivolous complaint which is being considered as a fraud and is being reported, but there is a proper evidence available with the auditor to carry out his reporting duties. So that is one guidance which is already available. Since 143.12 is already applicable to us, and I'm sure all of us are complying with the requirements under 143.12, I would suggest that guidance note and the flow chart in the meantime can be considered. Though this has been deferred, it does not mean that it is not going to be implemented. It is in fact more important that we consider them today and gear ourselves right from today, so that as and when the council decides to implement it, we would be in a better situation to effectively carry out our duties. Second is with respect to fees. So as you know, we had a self-regulatory measure for a long period of time that fees from a particular clients or a group of clients which are under the same ownership and management should not exceed 40% of our professional fees. So if it is exceeding 40%, the thought process was that it could impair the independence of an auditor. So the guideline or the self-regulatory measure was, and it was not to be applied in case of audits from public sector undertakings, public sector banks. It was not to be applied in the initial years of practice, so on and so forth. Those caveats were there. But the guidelines said that if your fees is exceeding 40% from one group of clients, then you need to exit from that relationship. You cannot continue in a situation that you are completely dependent on one set of clients. If you do that, if that be so, the society at large may feel that this auditor is not independent. And with that background, this guideline was brought in. Now, this guideline has been kept on hold, and we are expecting the new requirements of fees to be introduced. What the new requirement is that it requires, if your fees is more than 15% from one set of clients, you don't have to resign. You don't have to terminate the relationship. But you need to take extra steps to demonstrate to those charged with governance that how you are independent of the management. So, as I said earlier, for Indian Chartered Accountants to comply with the International Code of Ethics is not difficult, is for such reasons. Earlier, if my fees was more than 40%, I had to terminate that relationship. Now that 40% barrier or threshold is reduced to 15%, which some of us may say is more difficult to comply with. And I appreciate that. But the new requirement is if the fees from one client, one audit client is exceeding 15%, I am required to demonstrate to the audit committee of that client that I am still independent of the management. So assuming I'm a firm of chartered accountants, my fees is say a particular amount, and I get a new client, and the new client comes in with a higher amount of fees, such that the fees from that client is exceeding this 15% threshold limits. And if that situation continues for 2 years, that is when this issue of fees gets triggered. Then I would be required to demonstrate to the audit committee of that client that, look here, my fees is more from you than what my other fees is. Let's accept that. Having said that, I am still independent of the management, and how I propose to continue and carry out my audit duties, I can bring out to that audit committee. So the apprehensions which many members have that by introducing this concept of restrictions on fees would be detrimental to the interest of small and medium firms, I have a contrary view. I feel that it is enabling me to still demonstrate my independence and carry out my professional duties in that new assignment, subject to the satisfaction of the audit committee and members of those who are charged with governance. So this would in fact empower the small and medium professional firms to carry out professional duties or carry out audits, which may be relatively having larger fees without their independence being compromised, if they can demonstrate that they are compliant with the other requirements of code of ethics and they are compliant with the requirements of standards on auditing, SQC1 and the other requirements in the standards on auditing. I believe one can carry out the professional duties. So the provisions in the ISBA code, the international code contained in volume 1 are different, but not difficult to comply with. And that is the message I would like to leave in this webinar. The third is taxation services to audit clients. Now, worldwide, it is believed that if there is an audit client and you are rendering taxation services to that audit client, there is going to be a compromise with your independence. Now, the reason for that is that if you are giving a tax advice, if you're giving a client an opinion and suggesting him that if you do so and so, this will not have tax implications, or you're planning some mergers and amalgamations for the purposes of a reduction of the tax liabilities, or in some cases, the member is advising or is involved in valuation services, then there could be a conflict of interest between the opinion given and then carrying out my duties as an auditor by relying on my own opinion. And that is what leads to a self-review threat, in the sense that I have given an opinion as a consultant, and as an auditor, I rely on that opinion and say that the tax provisions made in the books of accounts are true and fair, are reasonable, giving a true and fair view of the statement of profit and loss of that year. So that is where the conflict comes in. So that is the global picture, and that is what is being proposed to be implemented in the Indian context. Now, here I believe our practices have been more robust, and we have situations which are different than what are the situations worldwide. For instance, we have an audit under Income Tax Act, Section 44AB. We have a guidance note issued by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India since 1984, around 40 years back when this audit requirement was introduced. That guidance note is a robust document being updated on a periodical basis. It gives guidance with respect to the specific functions of an auditor in reporting the various matters required to be reported under 3CB and 3CD. So there is, as an auditor, a guidance from the institute, which is not the situation in the other parts of the world. And therefore, that is one major thing which distinguishes our situations from what is there globally. Second is, in the context of the tax audit, as you know, there have been a lot of litigations in the tax arena. When this was brought in, the constitutional validity of tax audits was challenged. The matter was taken up in different high courts, went up finally before the Honorable Supreme Court, and the constitutional validity was upheld. A very important development which had taken place during the course of these litigation was a case which is by the name Rajkot Engineering Association versus Union of India. Before the Honorable Gujarat High Court, when this case was being litigated, the Undersecretary Government of India has filed an affidavit. That affidavit stands even till date. The affidavit is the SSE has a right to disagree with the opinion of the tax auditor and litigate on those issues, even if the tax auditor has given a qualified opinion in respect of some of the matters contained in the tax audit reports. So what it really brings out is that the role of a tax auditor is different and the role of a tax consultant is different. So these are very finely developed legal positions in our country, which may not be there in the other parts of the world. So in relation to the taxation services to audit clients, in my humble view, issuing income, filing the income tax returns, filing the TDS returns, filing replies on behalf of the SSE and appearing before the assessing officers per se does not constitute a conflict between my role as an advisor and my role as an auditor. But what we need to take care is we are not giving an opinion, and basis our opinion, the financial statements are not being drawn up or the tax provision is not being quantified basis our opinion. That would lead to a conflict of interest. So while this has been deferred, we need to ensure that even today, and we would be in the, many of us would be in the midst of finalizing the audit reports. Many of the audit reports of listed companies have already been issued. The next round of private limited companies and non-corporate entities would start soon. So though this taxation service to audit clients, the way it is covered in volume 1 has not been implemented, but we need to ensure that we are not giving opinions basis which the tax amount is being quantified. We are not involved in valuation of the, in any of the valuation matters which has an impact on tax quantifications, and so on and so forth. So these are precautions which we need to take even today. As and when this becomes applicable, the position may become a little more stringent with respect to what kind of tax services could be rendered to audit clients, and maybe some of the services which are permissible today may not be permissible tomorrow. And I'll take up some of these matters when we'll discuss shortly matters relating to management services, management responsibilities, and a new concept, a new terminology introduced in a code of ethics, administrative services. So I'll touch upon that in a short while, because that brings up for discussion a lot of practical aspects when we discuss these matters in the code of ethics. Now, the Ethical Standards Board, and this is something which Kemisha ji wanted to highlight as to so much of material which the Institute is providing to us, which is available on the websites of the Institute, freely downloadable. So we have this Code of Ethics, Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, then the frequently asked questions relating to professional ethics, particularly in case of bank assignments. There are always doubts and there are questions being asked. I've been a concurrent auditor of this bank. I've been appointed as a branch auditor. Can I accept that assignment or not? So many of these practical aspects have been discussed with in this matters on FAQs. FAQs on communications with retiring auditors, FAQs on books, articles, and presentations, announcements of KYC norms, know your clients' requirements of the Institute. All these are available on the respective links given in this slide, and this presentation will be available with the CP study circle, and therefore I'm sure all members can access the have an access to these very useful and very practical material which the Institute has provided. There are council guidelines for advertisements, FAQs on various FAQs on ethical issues, provisions relating to director simplicitors, independent directors, some of them which are, many of us would be directors on the boards of the companies. So what we are supposed to be doing, audio book and presentations on code of ethics, creatives, on code of ethics on social media. And social media is today a very powerful tool. It can be leveraged. At the same time, there are certain do's and don'ts which we need to take care of. So I'll not read out all these uh, documents which are available. Suffice to say, they are important from the point of view of each of our practicing members and also members in the industry. So depending on what is your requirement, I would sincerely urge you to have a look at these useful publications put up on the website. Compliance of financial reporting requirements in the IND-AS framework, what is very, very important. Also, compliance with respect to AS framework is also there. And this would be very important in terms of the audit assignments that we would be dealing with. Now, this is one area which Kemisha wanted to discuss in detail about what is it that a member in practice can do, which are the areas where permissions are required, and which are the areas where maybe a general permission is available from the institute. The reason why she has brought up this topic for discussion in greater detail is, as she shared with me, is that these are areas where council finds that inadvertently, many a times members make mistakes, and therefore, when we are discussing on a code of ethics, this would be of practical relevance from the point of view of many of our members. So we have, as I said, Chartered Accountants Regulations 1988. Regulation 190A brings out what are the areas where you could require permissions, and Regulation 191 brings out that what are the other areas which a member in practice could or the type of activities which a member in practice could carry out. So as you see that these are matters where you don't require a specific permission from the council of the institute. Being a liquidator, trustee, executor, administrator, arbitrators. Arbitration is fast encouraging. It is being developed. It is being encouraged by the honorable high courts and supreme courts, and there's a lot of potential for our members to become arbitrators and conciliators, in the sense that many of the commercial disputes have so many number grinding to be done, number crunching to be done, which a panel of arbitrators with lawyers would find it very useful to have a chartered accountant amongst them who could help them and advise them in terms of the ground realities of the commercial understanding of the disputes. So these are matters where no specific permission is required, and one could carry out these professional duties along with certificate of practice. Then advisor or representative for costing, financial or taxation services, taking of appointments that may be made by central or state government's code of laws, and in terms of carrying out duties in professional capacities, provided it is not for employment. So if there is any appointments being made, which is not in the nature of employments by the state governments or central governments, they could be accepted. The nature of transactions or the nature of the contracts or the terms of the contracts should be looked into carefully to see that it is not, the contract is not leading to an employer-employee relationship, and subject to that, such positions can be accepted. So we have clause 11 in part 1 of first schedule, which says that chartered accountant in practice is guilty of professional misconduct if he engages in any business or occupation other than the profession of chartered accountants, unless permitted by the council so to engage. Provided that nothing contained herein shall disentitle a chartered accountant from being a director of a company, not being a managing director or whole-time director, unless he or any of his partners is interested in such company as an auditor. So obviously, if you're a partner in an audit firm and the audit firm is the auditor of that company, you cannot be a director of that company because of the relationship of auditor which is there between the firm and the company. Subject to that, subject to the requirements of clause 11, wherever a person is taking up any employment engagements other than being at the same time while being in full-time practice, he has to take a specific permission from the council of the institute, and thereby, as we understand, our certificate of practice becomes a part-time practitioners, part-time certificate holders. Friends, the legal or the correct position is you remain full-time in practice and part-time in employment. Although colloquially we say we are in part-time practice, but technically you are still in full-time practice and part-time in employment. That is how it is looked at. So be that as may, I mean, one may say I'm in part-time practice or in part-time employment. The fact remains that as per the present requirements or present guidelines of the council, a person who is in part-time practice, as we call it, cannot be involved in the attest functions. So a person who is holding a certificate of practice along with an employment cannot issue certificates, cannot carry out any tax audits or company audits or issue any attest function, cannot be involved in any kind of an attest function. So this is one restriction for a person who is holding his certificate of practice and also being in employment. Second important restriction is that you cannot train articles. So if you're not in full-time practice, you are not permitted to train articles. But a chartered accountant who is in employment with a CA firm is deemed to be in practice under the Chartered Accountants Act for the purposes of training the articles. But any other kind of employment, it is there in any other than a CA firm, and is holding a certificate of practice, then that person cannot train articles and cannot be involved in the attest functions. So a practical discussion on this matters is important because this continues to be an area where the council is loaded with cases against our members who have inadvertently not taken permissions from the institute at the appropriate point of time. So as I said earlier, director simpliciter is permitted. A chartered accountant in practice can be a director simpliciter. So what do we mean by director simpliciter? Director simpliciter is essentially a chartered accountant who is a director, is attending the board meetings, carrying out his duties as a director as required under the Companies Act, which could be chairing meetings like audit committees or any other committees where that member is that director is member of that committee, and generally carrying out the duties as required under the Companies Act. But a director simpliciter is not involved in the day-to-day administration of the company. A director simpliciter is not one who will get regular remunerations from the company. A director simpliciter would get sitting fees. So that is the nature of, that is what we mean by director simpliciter. A director simpliciter can be a non-executive, non-independent director. A director simpliciter can also mean non-executive independent directors. So the difference is an independent director, the requirements are prescribed under the Companies Act, and you cannot have any pecuniary relationship with that company. So you are non-executive, you are not working on a day-to-day basis, and you are completely independent of the executive working of that company or the day-to-day working of that company. So that is what a director independent is. Independent director means. Whereas a non-executive, non-independent director would imply that if I am a director of a company and my firm is, let us say, appointed as an internal auditor of the company, is an advisor to the company, is carrying out taxation services for that company, then I have pecuniary relationship with the company. I'm not involved in the day-to-day management of the company, but I am in somewhere advising the company more than what a normal independent director would do. So that would be classified as a non-executive, non-independent director, and which is also permissible because the services that I'm rendering are the services which I can render or my firm can render in the normal course of chartered accountancy profession. So carrying out taxation services for a firm, while one is a for on behalf, if the firm is carrying out taxation services where the director, where a partner is a director, would mean that director is director simpliciter, and in terms of the Companies Act, becomes a director who is non-executive and non-independent. So when the ratio of independent and non-independent directors is to be calculated for various purposes under the listing requirements and the Companies Act requirement, such a director simpliciter would be considered as part of non-independent directors. So being a director simpliciter is permitted. But if somebody wants to be a whole-time director, wants to be a managing director of a company, then that would require a specific permission and approval from the council of the institute, which would require, which would make that certificate of practice, as I said earlier, a part-time certificate of practice, technically a full-time certificate of practice and part-time employment, whichever way we look at it, but it would be a part-time certificate of practice, not a full-time certificate of practice. And before any member holding COP takes up an employment, it would be important to inform the institute and take the permission. At least the fact should go from the member that I am joining a company and my certificate of practice may be treated as being part-time with effect from so and so date. So that precaution I would suggest one should ensure while taking up any kind of directorships along with holding certificate of practice. Now members ask queries that, can I be a promoter director? Can I be a signatory to the memorandum and articles of association? So the answer is yes. There is no bar in being a promoter of a company. There is no bar in being the initial subscriber to the memorandum and articles of associations, because these are legal functions. So if one can be a promoter, you can promote a company, you can have shareholding in a company, but your directorship should not be a whole-time director. You should not be a managing director or working director if you are holding certificate of practice. But subject to that, you can be a promoter of a company, you can be a signatory to the memorandum and articles of association. Now, important for us is to bear in mind the provisions of Section 25 of the Chartered Accountants Act. Section 25 says that the one cannot carry out in a corporate form as a company the attest function. So attest here would mean functions in the form of statutory audits cannot be done by a company limited by shares or limited by guarantee. So it has to be either individual name or a proprietary firm or a partnership firm. The partnership firm can be under the Indian Partnership Act 1932 or in the form of a LLP under the LLP Act. So that is the areas where the practice as an auditor is permitted. But management consultancy services or some of those services which are distinct from the audit services, they can be carried out in form of corporate form, and for which there is a different enabling provisions given in the institute's guidelines framed under the authority of the Act. So subject to compliance with those guidelines, one could form a management consultancy company and carry out those functions or those professional services which are not relating to attest function, but which are more in the nature of management consultancies. They could be carried out in the form of a corporate entity. And it has been made permissible that a member who becomes a director or a working director of that company would still be considered as a member in full-time practice and would be allowed to carry out the attest functions, provided that company also complies with the guidelines and other requirements which are applicable to a chartered accountant in full-time practice. So what it really means is, if as a practicing chartered accountant, I have restrictions in advertising. As a chartered accountant, we cannot advertise subject to those advertisement guidelines. We cannot advertise generally. We cannot solicit professional work. So clause 6 and clause 7 of part 1 of the first schedule of the Chartered Accountants Act 1949 contains the restrictions with respect to advertisements and solicitations. So the general legal principle is what cannot be done directly cannot be done indirectly. So if I cannot advertise, if I cannot solicit as a chartered accountant, does not mean or does not permit me to form a management consultancy services company, and through that management consultancy services company, I start advertising, I start carrying out solicitations, I solicit work. So that is not permissible. Otherwise, what would happen is, so like Manoj Fadnis as a chartered accountant cannot advertise. So I cannot say that I have formed a company, Manoj Fadnis Consultants Private Limited. And it is not, I am advertising in my professional capacity, but the advertisements are being carried out by that particular corporate entity. So that fine distinction is what is required to be maintained. Subject to compliance with that, management consultancy services can be carried out in corporate entity formats, and there are guidelines given by the institute in this regard. Now, there are some questions and poses which have been included. These are arising from the kind of questions which the Ethical Standards Board keeps getting from time to time, and subject to that and what the board has decided in such matters are some of the very fine practical issues which Kemisha ji has included in this presentation. Now, assuming I am a director, or one of us is a director, independent director of a company, we are there for a period of 5 years, and now up to another period of 5 years, say maximum 10 years, can such an independent director go and become an auditor of the company? Now, this is a provision which is contained in the Companies Act. Section 149 deals with what is the requirement for independent directors. And subsection 6, clause E, subclause 2 in part A and B says that once you have been an independent director, or once you have been an auditor of a company, then you cannot accept a position as an independent director for a period of 3 years. So once you are an auditor, then for a period of 3 years, you cannot be an independent director. Now, what happens the other way around? I have been, say, a member is an independent director. Can he be an auditor after he ceases to be an independent director? So let us say Chartered Accountant A is an independent director. The terms of the period of appointment as an independent director ends on 31st of March 2022. In July 2022, the company wants to appoint him as a statutory auditor for the financial year 22-23. He was an independent director till the period ending March 20. And subsequently, the company management says there's a very fine chartered accountant we had as an independent director. He was completely independent in his approach, and we would like such a person to be our auditor. So, can such a person accept the appointment as an auditor once having been an independent director? Now, on this issue, the law is silent. Companies Act does not contain a negative provision. Companies Act is silent. So Companies Act would permit a person who was an independent director to accept the appointment as an auditor. And there is no period required in between the two under the Companies Act. However, the council has decided, the council of the institute under the Code of Ethics has decided that there should be a period of 2 years between the point of time when your position as an independent director ends and you are appointed as an auditor of the company. There has to be a gap of 2 years. This is a requirement under the Code of Ethics. This is not a requirement under the Companies Act. Companies Act is only with respect to the appointment as an independent director. There should be a gap of 3 years from the end of your position as an auditor before you are appointed as a director, and that directorship has been considered as an independent director. So you will find, friends, that in many cases, our council has been proactively taking decisions which are far before those provisions come in the law. And this is one example which I'm very proud and happy to say, I must compliment the Ethical Standards Board, which they have decided only a couple of years ago, that even for a person who has been an independent director, before he accepts the appointment as an auditor, there must be a gap of 2 years, which is the gap which is there, or gap of 3 years is there when after being an auditor, you can be appointed as an independent director. So while the law remained silent on it, our council has proactively taken this step. So the next issue is whether a member in practice is allowed to become a full-time director of the company. So the answer is that subject to the permission, you can be a full-time director. So this is not a matter where there is a general permission available. This is subject to taking a specific permission from the council of the institute. But can a member provide professional services through a private company? So as I said, if there are management consultancy services which are permissible in the corporate entity format, member in practice can render those services and carry out those functions, even if he remains as a retaining his full-time certificate of practice. So this is subject to that management consultancy company complying with the requirements of clause 6 and clause 7 of the first part of part 1 of first schedule of the CA Act with respect to advertisement and solicitations. Then this is one area where I like to touch upon in a little more detail about what is management responsibilities, what is management services, what is management consultancy services, and there is also a new dimension of administrative services. And friends, this is somewhere where there are still some gray areas, and this is an area which is still evolving. The background of this matter is when the Companies Act 2013 became applicable from 1st of April 2014, as you know, section 144 contains the non-audit services, the requirements, those services which an auditor cannot render to his audit client. And it contains a list of those services like bookkeeping, internal audit, valuation services, so on and so forth. One of the areas which is covered in 144 is management services. Now, the term management services is not defined in the Companies Act. So, management services are not permitted to be rendered to a company where a person is an auditor. And this restriction applies both for private companies as well as for public companies, listed or unlisted companies, makes no difference. For all companies, section 144 provides that an auditor cannot render those services which are given in section 144. So management services is prohibited. Now the international ethical standards, volume 1 says that an auditor should not take up management responsibilities. So the term used is management responsibilities in our volume 1. The term used in the law is management services. So management responsibility is defined as a situation where the member takes up not only rendering that particular services, but also takes up the responsibility for execution of that services. So the international ethical standard says that if you are an auditor, you should not take up management responsibilities. So the management is different, the auditor is different. There are certain responsibilities which are on the shoulders of the management, and in no way the auditor can accept those responsibilities. The International Code of Ethics goes ahead to say that if you are not undertaking management responsibilities, that is, there is some person identified by the board of directors as the person who is responsible for the execution of those services. In that case, the auditor can render services without undertaking management responsibilities. So our volume 1 of Code of Ethics also contains the same provisions that without taking up management responsibilities, certain services which are management in nature can be rendered. Now, as against this, Section 144 says management services cannot be rendered. So, reading the provisions of Code of Ethics and the provisions of the Companies Act, in case of a company entity, company audit, the auditor cannot take up management responsibilities, the auditor cannot even render management services. I would look at management services to be somewhere below the overall umbrella of management responsibilities. So, under Code of Ethics, as long as you are not taking up the responsibilities, you can keep rendering services. But under Section 144, there is no question of taking up responsibilities, even management services cannot be rendered. So in context of a company, management services are not permitted. In context of non-corporate entities, let us take the case of partnership firms. Let us take the case of individuals, Hindu undivided families, trusts, societies, and trusts and societies are important because most of the educational institutions are in the form of societies and trusts, as is the requirement under the respective laws under which they get the right to carry out those educational activities. They should be not for profit. So they are invariably formed as societies or as trusts, even maybe as Section 8 companies under the Companies Act. But if it is an educational institution, is a society or a trust, then the Companies Act is not applicable. What is applicable is Code of Ethics. And in context of such an educational institution, an auditor can undertake services to that company, that institution, which is not a company, to that educational institution, which is say a society or a trust, can undertake services being rendered other than the audit services, provided the auditor is not taking up the management responsibilities. But in case of a company, if that educational institution is in the form of Section 8 company under the Companies Act, management services will not be permitted because Section 144 of the Companies Act, being part of a law, will always override what is contained in the Code of Ethics. So that distinction one needs to bear in mind. Now the question comes, what is management services? Management services are not defined under the Companies Act. There is no definition, no explanations under the law or from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs and as to what is the meaning of management services. Since the term is defined is used in the law, it is not possible for the institute to come out and define what is management services. So we need to understand what is management services in context of the entire literature and the law as it stands before us. Now, as I said in a few years back, the council has permitted a new category of management consultancy services, which is administrative services. The term very finely used in our by the Council of Institute is administrative services. So what it means is administrative services can be rendered. Administrative services are in the nature of tedious returns, filing income tax returns, where the member does not take up the management responsibilities. So one can interpret it in a manner that filing income tax returns, GST returns, company law returns is an administrative function. And these functions have been permitted in the category of administrative services, provided very important proviso is that the responsibility for the correctness remains with the management. So the auditor cannot say that I will take your books of accounts, I'll calculate the TDS which is required to be deposited, and I will ensure that it is paid. This is my responsibility. So that is not permitted. Now, what is permitted is my client gives me the data, what is the payments made, where the tax is applicable, what is the tax which is deducted. All that data is provided to me. I am helping or assisting the auditee in terms of compiling that information in the formats required, prescribed under the statutes, and enabling the SSE to file those statutory returns using the digital signature of the SSE, of the auditor. So that is what is permitted. Taking the benefit of the term used as administrative services in the code of ethics. Now the debate is not ending here. The debate actually continues, and the debate continues for the reason that the Honorable National Financial Reporting Authority, which is a authority constituted under Section 132 of the Companies Act, in some of the reports which they have made public, they have taken a view that management services means whatever the management is supposed to do. And if that is being done by the auditor, that will constitute a management services, which is not permitted under Section 144 of the Companies Act. So whether administrative services are also management services and therefore not permitted under Section 144 is a legal issue which is still open for debate. The council has very carefully used the word administrative services because these are matters pertaining to law, and it's not in the jurisdiction of the council to give clarifications and explanations of terms used in the law. Either the government or the law ministry can issue the guidance or clarifications as to what has been the legislative intent, or at some point of time, the honorable courts would decide what is the legislative meaning of the term management services. So today, as we stand, we need to be careful about what is the fact, what is the stand taken by the Honorable NFRA, what is the stand taken by our Honorable Council, and basis that one should decide what kind of services to render. So a practical view, and I'm not saying this would be the right view in all cases, but a practical view would be that in context of listed companies, which are also being governed by Honorable NFRA. An auditor should not render any services which are likely to be considered as management services by the Honorable Regulatory Authority. In context of other companies which are not within the jurisdiction of the Honorable NFRA and which are under the regulatory jurisdictions of the Council of the Institute and the Chartered Accountants, the Discipline Committee, there one could take a view that administrative services are not management services. But as I say that, I'm conscious of the fact that under the Amendment Act of 2022, the way our Chartered Accountants Act has been amended, none of the council members are going to be on the disciplinary committee. And therefore, it is possible that tomorrow that disciplinary committee of our constituted under the CA Act may take a view different and say that even administrative services are covered under Section 144 of the Companies Act. So this, friends, is a gray area. Now, what is a practical way is one, what I have mentioned. Second is, please document the reasons why you have considered what you have done. Documentations will help us. Our new code of ethics is requiring a lot of documentation. The way the standards on auditing require a lot of documentation. Similarly, the new code of ethics also require us to undertake documentation in a bigger way. So please document what we are doing and take conscious decisions on these matters. Be aware of the conflicting situations in which we are operating as auditors. Today, it is the regulatory environment is very active, is very sharply focused on the audit profession. That is right in the sense the importance that reflects, I would say, the importance of the audit, the importance of the function which you and I are carrying out as auditors. Considering the importance of that, the regulatory focus is very sharp on the profession. So let's be mindful of these realities and then take a conscious view as to what could constitute an administrative services and which are permissible and what may possibly go in the category of management services which is not permissible under 144. My view is, in matters of code of ethics, one should be more, uh, one should be more, uh, take a more conservative view. So if there is an iota of doubt whether this is possible, this is not possible, let us assume it is not possible and not do that activity unless we are confident that it is permissible under the code of ethics and permissible under the legal situation. So friends, moving ahead on this topic of what we can do as auditors, uh, not just as auditors, this is in the background of what uh, a person can carry out in his capacities while holding certificate of practices. Again, in relations to being a managing director or a full-time director of a Section 8 company. Now, there the position defined by the council is different. A member in practice can accept position as managing director or a whole-time director of a company registered under Section 8 of the Companies Act, provided his position is honorary and the company is of charitable, educational, or non-commercial nature. So, assuming you are designated as chairman of a company, an executive chairman of a company, which is actually running a hospital, which is running any other charitable activities, and is registered under Section 8 of the Companies Act. So the code of ethics says, yes, a member in practice can hold a position, a whole-time position, provided it is honorary. You are not being paid remunerations for that, and you are carrying out charitable activities. So there, holding an executive position is permissible, provided it is purely for charitable activities, and second, no remuneration is being received for those services. So this I covered earlier. This is a situation which is not there in the Companies Act, but this has been brought in under the Code of Ethics in 2020, that having completed the term as an independent director of a company, or even as a director of a company, not just independent director, having been a director of a company, then there has to be a cooling period of 2 years before that person or his firm can be appointed as an auditor of the company. So this, I think I've covered. MCS is permitted subject to the guidelines provided therein. So whether a firm of chartered accountants can undertake the assignments or management consultancy services of a company where a partner of the firm is a director solicitor, the answer is yes. But if that director is an independent director as defined under Section 149 of the Companies Act, then his firm cannot render services, because the moment the firm renders services and this director is partner in that firm, his position as an independent director gets compromised and he will not be considered as an independent director. But if he is a non-independent, non-executive director and is a director solicitor, in that case, the firm can render services, or even the director can render services for and on behalf of his firm to the company where he is a director solicitor. Now, given the virtual world in which we live and the kind of outsourcing which is happening, inbound outsourcing in India, virtual CFO service has become quite popular. So the company delegates all its CFO services to outsource it to a chartered accountant firm and calls them as virtual CFO services. Now this matter, after a lot of careful consideration, the Ethical Standards Board has opined that this cannot be undertaken by a firm or by a person in practice, because CFO, the term CFO, Chief Financial Officer, implies under the law certain functions to be carried out which are more in the nature of a day-to-day functioning. functioning for and on behalf of a particular company. And therefore, a member in practice cannot act as a virtual CFO and render these services. So we need to be careful as to how we execute a contract and what kind of services are being carried out. Now, friends, the visiting cards are very important in terms of what they contain and what is not required to be published on the visiting cards. When I give a card, my visiting card, and I say that I'm a chartered accountant, I'm a partner in so and so firm, this is what is normally mentioned, and the addresses. Now, along with that, if I say I'm a director of so and so company, I'm a past president of so and so institute, I have been an office bearer of so and so institute, it smacks of publicity. And therefore, the council has given very clear directions that nothing else can be mentioned on a visiting card, which is a card on which the name of my firm is printed. So the moment I issue a card saying I'm a give a visiting card saying I'm a partner in so and so firm, I cannot mention anything else on that card. So that is the underlying principle which one needs to bear in mind. So you may be a director, you may be a trustee, you may be holding honorary positions. We should not bring those matters on our visiting cards. We can have a separate card, separate visiting card, which says that you are an honorary secretary of so-and-so association. But on that separate card, the name of our firm should not be printed. So that distinction is required to be maintained. You may carry two cards. You may give the two cards simultaneously. One as a partner of so-and-so chartered accountant firm, and second as a trustee or as an office bearer of so-and-so society or a trust. That is permitted. Giving separate cards is permitted. But the card should not contain both the information. So that is the underlying philosophy which is being followed and which needs to be kept in mind with respect to visiting cards. Also important is that visiting cards, our photographs are not permitted. Now, this is one issue which I think our Council and Ethical Standards Board need to reconsider. And I would request the convener to just take a view on this matter, and whatever is the considered views of the members may convey it to the Ethical Standards Board. In my humble view, the requirement of not printing our photograph on the visiting card is arising from a decision taken by the council in 1996-97. After that, there is a website guidelines, there are advertisement guidelines, and photographs are permitted. And therefore, I do not see any compromise on the independence of a person if his photograph is printed on the card. And many a times it is helpful to have visiting cards with their photographs also, so that when you have a bunch of cards, you may not really recognize a person by his face unless his photo is also there on his visiting cards. So these are matters which are still in the which still need to be evolved, and therefore printing photographs on the visiting cards is one area where I believe our present guidelines can still be liberated a stage more. Then friends, with respect to being on the primary cooperative banks, urban cooperative banks, as is the case with director simplicity, one can accept a position as a director on the boards of banks, cooperative banks and other banks, provided it is not for employment, provided the position is same as a director simpliciter. Our involvement is only for attending the meetings of the banks and carrying out whatever statutory regulatory duties are assigned to us, getting no remuneration directly from those entities except by way of sitting fees and allowances and reimbursement of actual expenses, as is the normal case. Subject to that, a chartered accountant in practice can become a member of such urban cooperative banks and other banks. Then there is a GM portal, and this government portal, can we register our services? Can we register ourselves on these portals? So this is now being permitted, and a firm of chartered accountants can register, and I would suggest should register ourselves on these portals. These are government portals. Just ensure that the data that is being provided for being uploaded on these portals is factually correct, does not smack of advertisement, does not smack of any publicity. We are compliant with whatever is required in the code of ethics. It is factually correct. Then that data can be provided and the firms can be registered on the government e-marketplace portals. Now, this is one interesting issue, whether a member in practice owning intellectual property rights of few domain names, website names, give these names, domain names to some company for royalty. Now, what needs to be borne in mind is, if it is in the nature of business, then we cannot be in the nature of business. But if it is an intellectual property, and that intellectual property is being used for getting royalty income, that is of course permitted. But the transaction should not be construed in such a manner that, or the actual transaction should not be of such a nature that it is amounting to a business. So being in business is not permitted along with being in holding a certificate of practice. So by owning website names, if I've just registered certain website names and I'm outsourcing them, permitting others to use it, this to my mind would become more of a business transaction, and therefore it should not be carried out. But if I have certain intellectual properties, if I have registered certain formulas in my name, or if I have registered certain best practices, codified certain best practices and registered myself, and that is being exploited as and earning royalty income on that, I think that would be permissible, because that comes within the domain of professional services. So the essential differentiation between profession and business needs to be borne in mind. Now, many of our chartered accountants are excellent excellent analyzers of financial statements, can carry out a lot of research. Now, can they publish that as a research activity? So the answer is no. You can carry out the research, you can share that research with your specific clients if you have done that, but not publish it in the manner or carry out any activity which is otherwise prohibited without registrations with the Securities Exchange Board of India. So keeping that in mind, one should carry out such professional work. The portfolio management services are not permitted for a chartered accountant in practice to render without, and if one wants to render, one cannot hold certificate of practice. One needs to be registered with the SEBI, and thereafter one can render the portfolio management services in accordance with the SEBI regulations. So we are nearing 12:30, Jayesh bhai. I'll take another 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and whatever questions you think if members have, we can start discussing those questions, because the topic on code of ethics is very vast, and we can keep discussing these slides for another 1 hour, but I think it would be more important to focus on any specific questions which members may like to raise. Now, payroll services, and whether a practicing chartered accountant can agree to select and recruit personnel conducting training programs and work studies for and on behalf of a client. Just selecting and recruiting personnel, assuming you are being called in by a company or any entity which is in the process of employing a chartered accountant, and they want you to join that panel of some people representing the company, and you are selected as an expert to interview a chartered accountant to be recruited. Now, if you are not an auditor to that client, let's be very clear that whether you are an auditor or you are not auditor. So if you are not an auditor, then there is no restriction, no difficulties in being a part of a panel for selection of an employee. You can be an expert invited to on an expert panel for the purposes of recruitment of a chartered accountant or any other person. I mean, as chartered accountants, you can be competent to even recruit the managing director and be a part of a panel which is selecting the managing directors or other independent directors. So that is permissible, provided you are not an auditor of that entity. Second part in this is conducting training programs. Now, conducting training programs for your own clients is permitted. Conducting training programs in general or directly, indirectly advertising those training programs is what is not permitted. But there are amendments in the tax laws, there are amendments in the corporate laws, there are amendments in the accounting standards, and you are an auditor and you still want your audit clients to ensure proper compliances with those accounting standards. You organize a training program and charge a particular fees to your clients for enabling them to understand those provisions correctly is something which could be permitted. But if I say I'm going to open GST training classes and all and sundry are invited to that, carry out advertisements for that, that is where what may not be permissible as per the for a person holding a certificate of practice. Now, whether a member in practice can provide payroll services, again, if it is not an audit client, there is no difficulty. You can provide payroll services. If it is an audit client, it could come within the definition of management services and would be hit by the provisions of Section 144. If it is a non-corporate entity, you can provide the payroll services provided you are not undertaking the management responsibilities. The management responsibilities are with somebody defined from the management. You are just carrying out, you are being provided the data as to how many days the person's employed, how many days the person's worked during the month, what are the salaries to be paid, what is the calculations to be made. You find out what is the PF, ESI and other calculations, deductions of tax and source. So if that is the payroll accounting being done and management responsibilities is with the management, then for a non-corporate entity, even if you're an auditor, you can provide these services. And where you are not an auditor, there would be no restrictions in carrying out payroll services while holding certificate of practice. Now, some of our members who have non-resident clients and the clients have so much of faith in the members, so they may like the members to manage their funds in India. Now, this is not an activity which a chartered accountant in practice can undertake. And this is also requiring the approvals from other regulators like SEBI, and therefore managing funds, whether non-residents or residents, rendering portfolio management services, etc., are not open for a chartered accountant holding a certificate of practice. Now, social medias have become very powerful these days. So whether it is WhatsApp chats, whether it is Instagrams, Facebook, and now there are other types of messengers, telegrams, and so many other kinds of services which are there in social media. And social media is actually dominating the way we live in today's virtual world. Now, advertisements through social media. See, as a now a person like me who has been in practice for more than 35 years, and many of my people, many of my professional colleagues would generally be of a view that a professional should not advertise. I would never like to advertise. And I'm sure many of our members do not even like to advertise, even if they are allowed to advertise. But given the kind of business circumstances, complexities which exist today, if a member wants to advertise, then he or she is free to advertise subject to the guidelines on advertisements issued by the Council of the Institute. In 2006, when the Chartered Accountants Amendment Act was passed, some very fundamental amendments were made in our CA Act. Till 2006, undercutting was a professional misconduct. The Amendment Act of 2006 said undercutting is not a professional misconduct. Undercutting has been deleted from the code of from the first schedule. So after 2006, undercutting per se does not amount to a professional misconduct. Second, very important amendment which took place that in 2006 was advertisement has been permitted to the chartered accountants. The lawmakers have said that how much to advertise, what way to advertise, we leave it to your counsel to decide from time to time. But given the circumstances, if you wish to advertise, the law does not prohibit it. The extent of advertisement and the guidelines are required to be framed by the Council of the Institute. So, undercutting done away with, and same time advertisement permitted in a calibrated manner through the guidelines of the Institute. Now, the reason behind these amendments in 2006 was that we had a Competition Act which became applicable at the turn of the century. Competition Act encourages healthy competition. You cannot have cartels and have a disoriented competition. There has to be a competition. And Competition Act is meant to regulate and have healthy competitions in the economy. So service sector being an important constituent of the economy, we could not continue with the provision under the Chartered Accountants Act 1949, which says that undercutting is not is a professional misconduct. Because if I am rendering services to a client and I am charging, say, a particular amount, and tomorrow if some other member wants to render the same services but charge a lower amount, merely because he's charging a lower amount should not mean it is a professional misconduct. But what is required is that the members of the institute should ensure compliance with the ethical standards, should ensure compliance with the technical standards, and having done that, the commercial matters are left to them to decide how much fees they should charge. So that was the thought process behind doing away with this undercutting as a professional misconduct. Now our advertisement guidelines have come out, and they have been, the original guidelines were framed in 2008, have been substantially revised in 2020. The advertisement guidelines permit members to advertise. The advertisement should be factual. The advertisement should give a correct position. It should not smack of publicity. It should not say or give a view that it should not express that I am superior to others. That is not what is required to be. That is not what can be said through these advertisements. But what is the factual position? What are the services you are rendering? How many chartered accountants you are? What is the number of partners, managers, the size of the firm? Those data can be provided so that a person who is going to use your services can make a decision as to what is the areas in which this firm is working, whether they are working in an area which I need. Second is, will they have the professional competencies to execute the work which service seeker has in its mind. So to that extent, the advertisement has been permitted. Now, my suggestion, and giving the paucity of time, I'm not going into all the advertisement guidelines and social networking guidelines issued by the Institute. Kemisha ji has helped us with those links where we can go and get those guidelines, simple guidelines which are there, what are FAQs have been issued, what can be done, what cannot be done. Suffice to say that if a person wants to advertise, one should look at those guidelines carefully and see that we are within the framework of those guidelines. So if you want to carry out through your Facebook account or through a Twitter handle, be very careful as to what those guidelines are prescribing, and subject to the compliance with those guidelines, one can carry out the advertisements or one can convey a message using these social media tools. Now, there are certain online aggregators. It has become quite a very popular activity in the economy to have such online aggregators. But these are business activities. These are not professional activities. And since they are not professional activities, it is not open for a chartered accountant holding a certificate of practice to register oneself with such online aggregators and carry out the professional activities. So we should be very careful to keep a distance and not register through these online aggregators. This is a new thing which the institute has started, CA Connect. This is a portal, which is available on the institute's website. Members should take the benefit of this CA Connect and register oneself on this CA Connect. This will help us in being compliant with the requirements of the institute's code of ethics, and at the same time convey our message, convey to the society at large that so-and-so chartered accountant in Mumbai, so-and-so chartered accountant in any other place is available and is rendering services in specific areas. And be assured there are a lot of hits on these CA Connect, and many of the business service seekers are looking at such institute portals to identify who are potential chartered accountants whose services they can utilize. So registering on CA Connect because it is institute driven portal, it ensures that it is that the data and the manner is in compliant with the code of ethics. At the same time, our message can go out. So this is one of the very good features which I would compliment the council for bringing out in the recent past, and this will immensely help small and medium practicing firms. So, Jayesh bhai, it's already 12:40. As you said, we need to have 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. So I have many more slides and I can keep talking maybe for an hour also, but should not be at the cost of anything which members may like to ask by way of questions. So
Okay,
please feel free to stop me if there are any questions. Otherwise, I'll continue with my presentations.
Right. Surely, sir. There are a few questions. So definitely we'll request our coordinator, CA Rahul Dagaji, to if he can just take up the queries raised by the members.
Maybe I can stop here for the time being and enable Rahul bhai to put up those questions. And friends, I'm not really very confident. I'll try my best to answer those queries. If there are issues which require more deliberations, permit me to get back to you at a later point of time. But subject to that rider, whatever are the questions, I'll try my best to answer.
Is the screen visible, sir?
Yeah, now it is.
Yes.
On and off.
Okay.
Okay, now I can see it.
Yeah. Do you want me to read or?
I think you read out because it disappears also.
Okay. I'll just read it. Okay, the first question is, banks demand CA stamp and sign attest function on client's ITR for loan purpose, UDN for which as per ICI FAQ is not permitted. If mentioned to the bank, they ask just for stamp on ITR. Kindly guide what should be done.
No, don't follow what the bank is saying. Follow what the institute is saying. Once the institute has clearly said that we cannot stamp it as certified as true copies, we should not be doing it. Many times it happens that banks would even ask, ITR is a small thing. They say even get us the provisional balance sheet stamped by the auditors. And it is common amongst all the banks. that they ask the auditors to stamp the provisional balance sheets. Now, as auditors, we know what is provisional is provisional. How can I certify what is provisional? And we should not be stamping it. So even if the banks try and insist, we should desist from doing so.
Okay. Second query is, can a company pay fees for minor assignments to a firm in which the independent director is a partner? Value of assignment is less than 10% of the firm turnover.
These are, I think you can stop sharing because the screen is moving fast. So it's not readable at all. So yeah, kindly read out the questions. What you mentioned is a person is an independent director and the firm is rendering services which are less than 10% of the revenue of the firm. Now,
Correct.
there are guidelines being brought in by SEBI to that effect. And if you are in compliant with those guidelines of 10%, the way it is to be computed, you can do it. However, my view is avoid doing all that. If you are if a partner is an independent director on the company, avoid doing any work for that company. Either if the value of the services are more, then your partner should not be on the board of that company. You render professional services. But if one of the partner has decided to be an independent director, it is advisable not to do anything, any render services to that company.
Okay. The next question is, can a practicing CA obtain sub-brokership to earn sub-brokerage from investing own and family's funds into FDs or bonds?
Brokerage, sub-brokerage is not permissible for a member in practice, whether it is your own funds or someone else's funds. So you cannot share your profits with a non-member, and you cannot take a share of profit from a non-member. So that being the principle, taking brokerage, sub-brokerage, even if you say it is my own funds, you should not.
Okay. Next question. Can the independent directors who are CA earn commission permissible under Companies Act, since the director sitting fees may not be enough to compensate the time spent to review documents and prepping for the board audit committee meeting? What are your views on the same?
I think it is any fees which is being paid to the independent directors, and what is constituted in the form of commission is also part of the sitting fees. And to the extent it is permitted under the Companies Act, it should be open for an independent director to get those fees.
Yeah. Next question. There is an ambiguity around what constitutes management service is forcing practitioners leave work on the table for other non-CA providers. How can ICI help its members on this aspect?
I think this question we should leave it for Kemisha ji and our other council members to address. I have left the council long back, but see, what we should bear in mind is the concept of non-audit services is going to remain. If you are an auditor and you are rendering non-audit services, there is going to be a check and balance. And what came in the form of Section 144 of the Companies Act in 2014, in a way it was brought in by our council in 2002 when a guideline came in that the fees paid for other services other than audit fees cannot be more than what is the audit fees. So the logic was the auditor is appointed by the shareholders. If the shareholders have agreed for a fees of a particular amount, the other fees which is decided by the board of directors should not be more than what is the fees decided by the shareholders. So that was on the strength of maintaining independence of the auditors. And this announcement came in 2002. It became part of the law, as I said, from 1st April 2014. So non-audit services is going to be a very major focus area for audit fraternity. Now, it does not mean that it should go to non-CS. It can go to other chartered accountants. It can go to anyone else. Now, the law cannot say that this should be the exclusive domain of chartered accountants. Like Section 138 of the Companies Act permits cost accountants to be auditors, any other category of professionals as may be decided by the board of the company to be the internal auditors. Now, that is where the competition is there, and competition is always good for all of us in the ecosystem, provided it is properly regulated. Competition is healthy competition, and all those areas which are distorting the competitions are eliminated. So, what maybe the institute can do, and in fact has been doing over a period of time, is to see that there is a level playing field. If the level playing field is being disturbed, then the institute steps in and enables the profession to carry out those professional assignments given the circumstances which exist. Now, let me give you one example. And I have not touched on that subject in my discussion, is charging fees on a contingency basis. Our general understanding is that we as chartered accountants cannot charge fees on a percentage basis, which is rightfully so. But if the fees is decided based on a particular level of activity, so I want to decide fees for a client who has a turnover of say 10 crores, I will say, okay, my fees maybe say 10,000, 25,000, 50,000. But if the turnover is 100 crores, I would charge more than what I'm charging for a client having a turnover of 10 crores. Does not mean my fees is based on the turnover. I am evaluating the quantum of work involved on the basis of the turnover of the client, and depending on the quantum of work involved, I am deciding my fees. That is permitted. But if I say if your turnover is whatever is your turnover, I charge a percentage of that as my fees. That is not permitted. That is incorrect. That is not permitted. Similarly, if I say that if there is a tax demand, say many of our members who are in appellate practice. So if a member says, if your tax demand is say 1 crore, my fees is going to be 1 lakh of rupees. Now, this is not based on a contingency, and therefore this is permitted. What is not permitted is to say that depending on the kind of relief that I get you in the appellate first appeal, I'll charge my fees. So if you get a relief of 50% of the demand, my fees will be linked to that. That is not permitted, because that is based on the outcome of a service which you are rendering. But if you are charging fees saying that, okay, your additions are 5 crores, my fees is so much. So that is not against our regulations. Similarly, in the areas of non-assurance functions, a client which is not your audit client and the services are not related to any attest functions, their charging on contingency is permitted. So, say for fundraising activities, companies want to raise funds, and company will say, I'll pay you only on the success basis. Now, if that company is not my audit client and I'm not rendering an attest function, it is a management consultancy services. So there, the institute has permitted members to charge fees on a success basis. So these are the areas where the institute enables the profession to do away with the impediments of not having a level playing field. And these are the areas which you and I should identify and tell our representatives in the council that please look at these additional areas where maybe you can step in. So that is what the council can
do. Next question. As per the revised guidelines on networking 2021, if one firm does audit work, another firm in the network cannot perform non-audit services of the same client. Need some clarification on this.
So this is on the basis of the provisions contained in section 144. 144 says if you are an auditor, then any firm which is your holding company, subsidiary, which is holding subsidiary associate, these are the terms used in the law. they cannot render any of these services to the company. So management services which cannot be rendered by the auditor cannot be rendered by any other firm in which this firm is associated. And therefore, any firm which is a part where this firm is a part of a network, the network firms will not be allowed to carry out the services which are prohibited under Section 144. Similar regulations have been brought in by Reserve Bank of India. And Reserve Bank of India has gone a step further last year to say that amongst the group companies, if there is a company which is also a RBI regulated entity, then the auditor of the parent company cannot be the auditor for the subsidiary company if that subsidiary is also a RBI regulated entity. 144 is with respect to providing non-audit services. The Reserve Bank of India regulations applicable to the banks and non-banking financial companies. So if a bank has a subsidiary which is not a RBI regulated entity, there the auditor of the parent bank can be an auditor of that subsidiary. But if the subsidiary is an NBFC, then in relation to that NBFC, which is a RBI regulated entity, the auditor of the parent bank cannot be an auditor of the subsidiary. So these are regulations meant to enhance the independence of the auditors and to see that the other work which is being done by them or being done by the network firms do not finally impair the independence which an auditor is required to exercise. And in that context, I believe that the council network guidelines, I would like to interpret the council guidelines in line with what is there under the law and regulations.
Okay. Next question. Can a member not holding a COP be a director and get remuneration?
Well, if a member is not holding certificate of practice, then first schedule part 1 does not apply to him. And he is free to share his fees. He is free to take fees from non-members and carry out. So if a member is not holding certificate of practice, he can advertise, he can solicit, he can share his fees, he can share fees of others because he is in business, he is not in profession. So one has to decide whether one wants to hold a certificate of practice or not. And if one decides to hold certificate of practice, then all these restrictions come in because you are in a profession. Profession is different from a business, and profession will demand a lot of such sacrifices by the professional.
Next question. Sir, this is related to the previous question on commission to independent director. Earning commission is specifically disallowed under Code of Conduct of ICI. Would we need to take a permission of the ICI for this?
One can take one's view on what is required to be done, but in my view, where the commission is actually in the nature of sitting fees, and sitting fees, it is forming part of your fees, which is permissible, would be something which would be permissible.
Next question. If a practicing CA is also a registered valuer, can he take assignments in the firm name or should he take in the personal name? What would be a bar under Code of Conduct?
Person in practice under the Chartered Accountants Act and regulations, one can practice in the name of individual name, one can practice in the name of a firm. Firm can be a proprietary firm or a partnership firm. So partnership is both under the Partnership Act 1932 and also under the LLP Act. Now, under that conditions, if somebody wants to be a valuer and has registered oneself as a valuer and is permitted to hold certificate of practice, it would be open for him to decide whether to carry out the professional services in the name of his CA firm or carry it out separately in his individual name. If he carries out his other business or other professional activities in his individual name, then the only risk that he takes is for the purposes of empanelment with the Reserve Bank and C&AG, he will not be considered as an exclusive partner in that partnership. And to that extent, the firm will not get the credit for this person's standing. So this is a matter for the individual chartered accountant and the partners to decide. If assuming his valuation services are very high, his remuneration is high, and he does not want to share that with others for whatever rightful reasons, in such a case, it would be better to take that in a different entity as a separate firm or a separate in his individual name and with due intimations to the institute, and then do away with the benefits of empanelment. But if the empanelment benefits are more important to a firm, then keeping those commercial matters in mind, one can accordingly decide that even the valuation work will be done for and on behalf of the audit firm, and all fees will come in that.
Next question. Can we include our name under CA section of Yellow Pages directory?
Yellow Pages at at some point of time was very popular, and the guideline given by the institute was that it should not be prominent, it should not be different than the other names. You cannot have your name being printed in a bold manner as compared to others so that it brings out more prominently. Keeping those in mind, one could put one's name in those yellow pages.
So one more question. For bank loan, is CA authorized to certify unaudited balance sheet of an individual client? Is UDIN to be generated? It is not provisional balance sheet. It is past 2 years balance sheet on basis of which ITR is filed. Client is not subject to audit.
If the client is not subjected to audit, what is the assurance that you are giving by certifying that unaudited financial statements? You are essentially then required to issue an accountant's report. An accountant's report says that, and there is a particular SE, the standards on engagement, SRE, which brings out the format. The format says that the entire responsibility is of the client. The responsibility for the preparation, completeness of controls, is everything with that client. And it brings out what is the nature of services which you are doing. If you are issuing an accountant's report, then only you can issue a report. Otherwise, there is no way you can stamp those financial statements and say that these are certified from the income tax returns filed by the SSC in the earlier years. This is exactly what the announcement of the institute says is what cannot be done by chartered accountants. Because whether it is a certified true copy or not of the returns filed is not a matter for an auditor to decide. It is for the persons holding the license as a notary to do that. And therefore, please let us not do what is being expressly prohibited by the institute.
Okay, there are no more questions with me. Jayesh bhai, over to you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, Rahul bhai, for taking the questions raised by the members. And truly, our past president, C. Manoj Fadnis, sir, it was a wonderful deliberation, sir. You have covered the technical and the theoretical and practical aspects of the code of ethics. And members are also appreciating your practical approach and practical view.
Rahul bhai, we are joined by Kemisha ji.
Yeah, definitely, sir. I'm on that only, sir. So thank you very much, past chairman, sir. And now, as committed, our Central Council member, C. Kemisha Soni madam, because of her bad health and she couldn't join us at morning. But then she is the way she is committed to her commitments. So rather she has joined us for a few minutes. If her health permits, I would request madam, if you can just throw some lights on today's topic. She is being a vice chairperson of the ethical standard boards. Apart from academical achievements, she is also holding the positions national and international level. But I'm not going into it because of the lack of time. She's having a long profile, but request madam, if she can just throw lights on today's topic. Madam, please, if your help permits.
Yeah, thank you, Jayesh bhai, and very good afternoon and greetings everyone. From Indore, our one and only president, ICI, CM Manoj Fadnis ji, because he is only president from Indore and Madhya Pradesh also, and under his guidance, I would say that because of my interest in code of ethics, because of him, when he was vice president and he was in council that time, he has given certain assignment related to revising of this code. So thank you, sir, for taking this session. And of course, convener Jayesh Bhai Thakkar and deputy convener and members of JV Nagar CP study circle. Because I'm suffering from fever today and because of viral, so I couldn't attend this program, VCM. So my idea was that what I have discussed with Jayesh Bhai regarding code of ethics, because in last 1.5 years, we have covered technical provisions related to our revised code of ethics. Now this is the time. What are the practical issues and practical approach related to our code of ethics? For that, even council has decided regarding mandatory CP 2 CP hours for code of ethics. So we should start with practical approach also for easy implementation of code of ethics. So in that sense, even we have last year created a group in Mumbai and Indore also, and one of group particular related to advertisement on social media. So our honorable past president Fadnis sir was convener of that group. So just I would like to inform certain development related to recent what has been passed in our ethical standard board and council. That one is related to that deferred provision that already deferred up to 30th September. And meanwhile, we are planning certain outreach program for easy implementation of those provisions related to NOCLAR, related to tax related services and other provisions. And second one, what I would like to share about that today's program, because already we have covered and I have given name 2.0, because last time, so under that basic 5 fundamental principle and 5 threads, apart from that, above it, all of these principle and threads, independence and conflict of interest, certain related issues are most important at the time of handling our assignment. So that also we have certain practical publications, and I am sure that Fadnis sir in his PPT has already shared that link of that publication, which are related and updated as per 2021 guideline. Certain point also I would like to share about that already covered by Fadnis sir already, that related to certain other occupations with COP holder. So 3 or 4 points just I would like to cover because of we are running short of time. Permissible area of other occupation. So generally our members should concentrate on 4 or 5 provisions which are specifically related to that. Just I will give you overview of that. One is related to director provisions, specifically director being a simpliciter, independent, as per clause 11, that restrict our members with COP for certain type of other engagement, business and occupation. But in case of that proviso, that our member can be director in companies, so that we should consider. But in case of managing director and director full-time director, so only one form is available, that is under our corporate form of practice and section 224. So member can develop that area also, because that is list already been given in our corporate of practice, that appendix D already there, and volume 2 page number 11 to 14 already mentioned about list of services what our member can provide, like in the form of corporate practice. So that should develop, because in last 2 or 3 queries members has raised regarding register value or insolvency, arbitration, that is certain, that is allowable with COP. Certain areas are like that, ki allowable with general permission, with special permission. But in case of general permission, our member can easily conduct that particular type of services. But with special permission, then attestation work also will affect. So that also will have to check according to that nature of engagement, and specifically in case of HUF also. So certain relaxations are there. Sometimes members are not aware about that type of relaxation. So our member can develop their practices according to our legal framework, our code of ethics. So that is certain points which I would like to share with you all. And regarding that, I think the written what one member has raised query. So I think Fadnis sir, that is related to 4410 compilation.
Yes, yes.
So that also UDIN will required in that case also. So that is answer of that. So these are some points what I would like to mention. And thank you very much, Jayesh bhai, for inviting me. And thank you, Fadnis sir, for taking this session.
Thank you, Kemisha madam. It was a wonderful insights. So with this technical deliberation from our leader and past President Manoj Fadnis sir, and you have just then we got the add-on right on this important topic. So thank you very much.
Jayesh bhai, just you can wish that we have another person from Indore becoming the president of the institute and the first lady president for our institute. With those wishes, we can thank Kemisha ji for joining this webinar in spite of her ill health.
Thank you for your blessing and guidance, sir. Thank you.
She's schedule was the way it was. She was carrying a busy schedule, but since it was committed, so even she joined us at least for the 5 minutes. But it was wonderful experience with you, madam, and we'll be expecting from both of you to have a good learning in future also. So we'll be needed your support throughout our journey. So thank you very much for joining both of you. Now
Thank you, sir.
Now it's a time to conclude. So I would like to now request our Deputy Convener, CA Purvi Bagaria ji, to propose a hearty vote of thanks to the speakers, members, and the coordinators.
Thank you, Jayesh bhai, for the opportunity. I, Purvi Bagaria, on behalf of the JB Nagar CP Study Circle, would like to propose a very hearty vote of thanks to both our today's speaker, CA Manoj Fadnis and CA Kemisha Soni, for having this wonderful and insightful session on the ethics. We are hopeful that all our members have greatly benefited from the session and they will all be making more ethically conscious decisions in their day-to-day practices because of the session. Thank you so much, sir, for your detailed presentation and taking all the queries. Thank you, ma'am, for your additional insights. And we do wish you a healthy recovery, hearty recovery. And thanks to all the members who have joined the session and been a wonderful audience. Thank you to the coordinators for coordinating today's events. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all.